Amen. Hey, I'm so glad you're here today. My name is Darren. I'm the pastor here. So happy to have you. A big hello to those of you who are joining us online today. I'm so glad to just look right to wherever you are and to tell you we see you. And why don't you just jump into the chat and let us know where you're watching from and how we can serve you in any way, if we can pray for you. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss anything. And for those of you here, so happy to see you in person. Thanks for coming back, and love to meet you right after the service. I'll be out in the lobby with my wife, Laurie, and we'd love to say hello. But a big thank you to all of you who responded to that survey I asked you to fill out. I'm so happy you did. 1,233 people have already filled it out, which is amazing. That's way more than the scientific sample that we need to make this all work. But I would love to hear from all of you for sure. That means about 2/3 of you still have a chance to let us know what you think. I want to grow, and I want our church to grow, and we want to serve you better. So please take some time when you get that email that comes again, take a few minutes, fill it out, and tell us what we can do to serve you better. In fact, if you're online, that link is going into the chat right now, so let us know. Hey, thank you also for your generosity and the way you give. As you know, there's been some big disasters that have hit our country, people suffering in North Carolina, and then Haiti as well in the Caribbean. We've got Florida that went through that big hurricane. And Convoy of Hope is on the ground. We have a 20-year partnership with them. And anytime there's a disaster, they're rolling in before the storm hits. And because of your generosity, we were able to help them in a tremendous way. And I just want to encourage you that if you'd like to be a part of that, we'll pass that right through to Convoy of Hope. But the reason why I mention Haiti is it's often a forgotten place. It's a place of great suffering. It's the poorest country in our hemisphere. It's a place I grew up. And there's not a lot that we can do. I can't even go there right now because of the security situation. Most of the partners that we work with, they've had to leave the country because they don't have law and order. So a friend of mine is actually on the ground, and he's training security, peacekeeping forces and the police that are really trying to bring law and order back. And through your generosity, we provided thousands of emergency medical kits, basically to save lives when one of those people gets hurt or gets hit. And so I want to thank you for doing. The best way we can provide ministry to Haiti is to let law and order come back so that ministry can return. So thank you for your generosity. You may never go there, but your giving went on in front of you. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. If you go online, if you text the word give to 68,000, it'll take you to our giving page, and you'll see all the places where your giving is making an impact. I have the honor of being led by 4 different covering pastors in this church, and they are incredible men and women of God. One of them is here with me today, and he is the one who has been my coach and the one who's helped my personal transformation so much. His name is Dr. Jim Harrington. He's no stranger to many of you. A few years ago, he founded an organization with Tricia Taylor called The Leader's Journey, and they will tell you more about that. But I'm so glad that they're here. We recently had them this week to train all of our staff and all of about 150 leaders in the church. And it was a tremendous experience, and you'll hear more about that. But today, it's so good for my soul to be pastored today, and I'm so glad that they're going to come and share God's word with you. Would you put your hands together for Tricia Taylor and for Dr. Jim Harrington?
Good morning, Heartland. Good morning, Heartland. There you go. So good to get to be with you guys. We're Jim and Tricia, Jim Harrington, Tricia Taylor. I had a couple of people come up after the last service and say, would you be sure and tell your wife, blah, blah, blah. Tricia and I are partners. She has a husband, I have a wife who happen to be good friends. We've worked together for 25 years or so. And we run a company called The Leader's Journey. What we do is we coach individuals in their own journey of transformation. We help organizations, both churches and for-profit businesses, develop leaders in their companies. And in general, our theme is the theme of transformation and learning how to help people on that journey. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is, if you came expecting a sermon today, you're not going to get one. Instead, what you're going to get is us doing some coaching around the journey of transformation. There are going to be a couple of times where we're going to ask you to do something, maybe turn and talk to someone, or maybe just get quiet and still, and we'll quit talking and you'll do some thinking. And if you don't want to participate in the conversations, you can just hold your hand up when we get to that, and we'll let you reflect while the rest of us are talking, and then we'll get you to come back here. And yeah. And then the final thing I want to say is this month is Pastor Appreciation Month. And I know you love your pastor. Hold your applause for just a moment, because I want to tell you something about him that you may or may not know. What you know is he's one of the most humble, smart, passionate, Jesus-loving people on the planet. What you don't know, maybe you don't know, is that we're living in a postmodern, post-Christian world where the church is really off map and is having to find a way to do ministry in a new context. And Pastor Darren and the folks here at Heartland are really leading the way. In one frame of reference, they'd be talked about as being innovators who are helping find the way to be in this new off-map kind of way. And so not only is he helping you here, but he's helping other pastors in Indiana, and he's helping pastors across the country. And it's just such a great privilege to know him. And I want you to know today how much I appreciate you. And I think we want to say thank you, Pastor Darren, for
I think every time we saw that baptism video this morning, it brought tears to my eyes. Don't you love that video? I mean, we have a thing for transformation. You're here this morning because you want transformation in your life. We want transformation in our lives. Our baptism was a long time ago, but we still want that transformation. And we do a lot of work where we walk people through a process. And somewhere in that process, we will hear from them, my life has changed. I mean, not just incremental growth, which is great. God works in incremental growth all the time. But they will say, I'm different because of this. I'm transformed. And we started wondering, more than 20 years ago.
Yep.
So what is the thing that makes that possible for some people? That some people really do grab hold of the transformation that God is offering them. And here's what we have come up with. That what actually opens the door to transformation is a deep and rigorous authenticity. And here's what I mean by that. It is that sense, that willingness to say, I want transformation bad enough that I am willing to tell the truth. I'm willing to tell the truth about myself. I'm willing to tell the truth about my gaps. I'm willing to tell the truth about my heart to myself, to God, and to some other people. If you've ever experienced healing or freedom from an addiction, or if you've walked with someone who has, you know that the turning point is the moment that someone decides, I am ready to tell the truth no matter what. And that is as true for me as it is for somebody sitting in an AA meeting this morning. The door to transformation, we believe, is opened through authenticity.
For 17 years, my wife Betty and I we pastored a network of house churches in the inner city of Houston, 6 house churches where we lived in community with people in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. And we just learned a ton of stuff about how to minister to people and how to do that kind of work. But one of the things that we learned to say to people all along the way was, if we can't talk about it, we can't work on it. If we can't talk about it, you rob yourself of prayer support, of encouragement, of accountability, of challenge, of all those things that are required to do the journey of transformation. And increasingly, we lived in a community where people would learn that and learn to begin to do that, learn to be able to talk about whatever it was that needed to be talked about. We define, and it's not our definition, but we define authenticity as transparency plus vulnerability. Transparency plus vulnerability. So transparency, I say what there is to say. I say what I think, I say what I feel, I say what I'm curious about, I say what I'm resisting, I say where I'm hurt. Like whatever there is, I am transparent about that. And there is the requirement of a certain level of vulnerability because you're not being transparent because you're afraid. You're afraid you're going to get rejected. You're afraid you're going to get judged. You're afraid you're going to get cut out or cut off. You're afraid you're going to get shamed. There's some fear in there. And so there is the requirement of risking some vulnerability that that gives you access to something that you don't have access to otherwise. And so I want you to, like, with that definition of transparency and vulnerability, I want to tell you a little bit about my own growing up and then get you to think about and maybe even talk about some of your growing up. So I grew up in a great home with a mom and dad who, my earliest memories of going to church. Sunday morning, we had Sunday night services. We had a prayer meeting on Wednesday night. We had a teachers and officers meeting, and my parents were teachers and officers. I mean, we were at the church all the time. They were good people. My dad was the principal and a superintendent of schools. My mom was a community leader and taught a Sunday school class and sang in the choir. I mean, anybody who knew them would say, the Harringtons, they are great people. What was also true was that my dad had grown up in a home. His parents were alcoholics. His grandmother had raised him. When he was about 14 years old, his grandmother was shot and killed in his presence. And so he came to adult life with some trauma back in the day when we didn't even know what trauma was, much less how to help somebody process their trauma. And so I lived with these great people who loved God and knew the Bible and went to church. And periodically, my house could be a really dangerous place to live. And in the dangerous place to live, what I learned pretty early on, and I learned it the hard way, was, you know the saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Well, I learned what happened in my house stayed in my house. One of the first times that, like, I was in about the second grade and my dad lost his temper and became violent, and I went to school that day or the next day, and I was apparently really sad, and it was kind of on my, showing up all over me. And Miss Hogan, my teacher, asked me what was going on, and I, like a little child, I just told her. Well, by the time I got home, my dad had found out, and my home, again, was not a safe place to live in. What I learned was that in my house, it was not safe to talk outside of the house. And what I learned over time was it was not safe to be vulnerable inside the house. What you had to do was you had to pretend and put on a mask. I'd walk in the door and figure out what was going on in the room. Where was, what was the temperature of the room? Where was the closest exit? Don't do anything to draw attention to yourself. Don't do anything to ask for what you need. And all of those became habitual ways that I showed up. And we talk about that as our first formation. Everybody has a first formation. You're not bad people because you have a first formation. You're human because you have a first formation. And one of the really important pieces or parts of growing your capacity to be authentic is to be able to tell the truth about your first formation. So I'm going to ask you to do something. Remember, you get to be as vulnerable as you want to be or not. And if you don't want to play, hold your hand up and you don't have to play. But what I'd like for you to do is turn to a partner and say, what did you learn in your first formation, in your family of origin? What did you learn about being vulnerable? What were you told to do or not do, to say or not to say? How were you told to act or not act? Like, what can you see about what you learned in your family of origin about if it was okay to be vulnerable? Would you turn and talk to a partner about that? We're going to give you about 2 minutes. If you don't want to play, hold your hand up, and it's okay. No shame in that. Okay, come back here if you would, please. The hard thing about giving it away sometimes is getting it back. Would you come back here? Bring your attention back to the platform. So if you don't hear anything else I say today, I want you to hear what I'm about to say. If you don't hear anything else, I want you to hear this. In the book of Ephesians, Paul talks about taking off the old self and putting on the new self. And what you just did in this little exercise, in just 60 seconds, what you just did was you began to give expression to your old self. Now, I want to say this. Your old self is not your bad self. Your old self is the self that developed so that you could be safe. So my dad was unsafe, and I learned not to ask for what I needed, because when I did, it was dangerous. I learned to stand on the edge of the room. I didn't have a conscious thought, stand on the end of the room so you'll be safe. It was just an automatic kind of thing that happened. And so your old self is not your bad self, it's just your immature self, your incomplete self. And if you don't do the journey from old self to new self, then what's going to happen is you're going to have an 8-year-old boy or a 10-year-old girl running your life. And we don't let children run adults' lives for a lot of really good reasons. And so part of what I want to say to you today is your old self is that as an adult, your old self becomes that inauthentic self. It's where you take what you learned in your childhood and you hide and you pretend and you don't take responsibility and you don't do the things that adults have to do, and that's your old self. And so Paul's saying, take that off. And it would be great if, we could read the scripture and Paul would say, okay, great, I want to take it off. We live in a world where, in Western culture particularly, it's like everything happens instantly. Go to the McDonald's drive-in window, the Starbucks drive-in window, or turn on the TV, and instantly you have all those choices. But the Bible calls this sanctification, and the sanctification journey is a lifelong journey. I'm still taking off some of my old self. I'm still putting on some new self. And so if you can manage those expectations and not expect to just magically get it changed, but there's this journey, this lifelong journey, then your old self is that, think of any place where you show up inauthentically. And that's the place that your old self is showing up. Your new self is the self of who you are in Christ. In Christ, like when Jesus was asked what's the greatest of all the laws and the prophets, and what he was said was, love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I'm pretty certain that it's a fair translation of that to say every human being needs a deep connection to God, a deep connection to others, and a deep connection to self. And the new self is that self that I show up. I show up with Tricia. I show up with Pastor Darren. I show up with people who scare me. I show up with my enemies. Ultimately, as I grow and mature, I grow up in those places, but I do that from the place of being connected to God, being connected to others, and being connected to myself. And so there is this lifelong journey. When we say transformation, we're referring to the lifelong journey of taking off the old self and putting on the new self. And a part of that is what you just did, where you can't take off what you can't name and see. And so you began in just that moment to say, here was a part of my old self. Now, what does it look like for you to take that off and put on something different?
So you just practiced that a couple minutes ago for less than 60 seconds. Would you keep that conversation going? Would you at lunch today with whoever you go to lunch with, your family, your friends, if you're on your own, just get out a piece of paper and a pen and think about it. And would you start to think about, what did I learn in my first formation? What did I learn about whether it was okay to be authentic and vulnerable, whether it was okay to say what there was to say to God and to other people? What our old selves learned to do was to hide, even from ourselves, definitely from God. Adam and Eve started that, from each other. We started learning to focus on looking good, that if the outside could be put together, then maybe nobody would pick up on what was going on the inside. We learned to pretend. We learned when somebody says, how are you? We learned to say,
I'm fine.
Absolutely. I want to talk about two ways that can sometimes look, and I'm going to ask you in a minute to raise your hand to say whether you're one or the other. These are on a spectrum, but at one end of the spectrum, these are those of us who are kind of loners, in the sense that We might be around people, but we're going to say, if you ask us how we are, we're going to say, I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'm all right. Leave me alone. I'm good. That's one end. On the other end, some of you, some of us are people. We smile, we shake hands, we're hugging necks, we're walking around. But down deep inside, we may be super friendly, but we are not going to show you the real me. Okay, now I know most days you are perfect, but on the days you are not perfect, how many of you would say, I'm more on this end, I'm fine, leave me alone? Yeah, okay. And what about on this other end? I'm hugging your neck, but I'm not going to show you who I really am. Yeah, about evenly divided. That's what we learn. We learn how to show up this way, like Jim said, so that we'll be safe and so that we can get our needs met. I became a pastor's wife when I was 21 years old, which was probably too young to be a wife, period, but definitely too young to be a pastor's wife. And it was hard. And I want to stop for a minute and just say, that is a hard role. It is not an easy role. And we talked about Darren a minute ago, but I want to stop and say this about Laurie. Your pastor's wife is a truly remarkable person.
She is.
It's true. She is a pastor in her own right. She is lovely inside and out. She radiates warmth and care. And she loves this congregation. She sacrifices for this church. I don't know where she gets the energy to do everything she does, but Lurie and I know that being the spouse of a pastor is such a blessing, is a deep blessing. And it's hard. And I want you to go back with me. I was 21 years old. I was still figuring everything out. And what I saw was that there's a role that I needed to fill. And I don't think I ever asked myself, what are my gifts? What do I want to offer here? What are my interests? What does God want me to do? Instead, my starting place was, what do people want from me? What do people expect? How do I keep everybody happy? How can I please everyone? I learned that in my family growing up, by the way. And what happened was, I love having people in our home for like a bowl of soup and deep conversation. But what I ended up doing was throwing these big fancy baby showers for the church where people would come to my house and drink punch out of a punch bowl. And if I don't ever go to another event where there is a punch bowl, I think that will be fine with me. And I love to teach the Bible, but what I ended up doing, trying to, keep people happy, was teaching children's choir. Now, there are people gifted at children's choir. I was not one of those people. And what happened, as I could go on and tell you these stories, I was unhappy with myself and with my life. I felt like I was in a box, and I was resentful of God for putting me in that position. And transformation came to my life and to my marriage and to my relationship with God when I finally started telling the truth to myself, to God, to other people about who I am and who I'm not. I love to teach scripture, and I hate punch bowls. And transformation came when being the person God made me to be was more important than being who everyone else wanted me to be. And you know. Because most of you clapping are not pastors' wives. That's not why you're clapping. You're clapping because you're also in a box like that. And you're also asking yourself the question, how do I please everybody and meet everybody's expectations instead of how do I be the self that God gave me the day that I was born and even to this day is drawing out of me? Transformation came for me when being that person became more important than anything else.
Well, and what I think I hear Tricia describing is when we talk about the new self, we talk about what it means for you to be uniquely you, what it means for you to be fully human and fully alive, to live an epic life that God designed you to live. Not a life of fame and fortune, not a life of popularity and like there's a lot of stuff that comes in all of that, but it's this, who are you created to be, and what does it look like for you to find, to make the journey to the place that you're living out of that new self in the way that God designed you and created you. And so we use a definition as you begin to think about, okay, so I've got this old self and there's this first formation, and I begin to look at that and I can see some things, and then I begin to ask and answer the question, kind of what are the boxes that my first formation put me in, and what did that take away from me in terms of what I think God created me for. That's a process that doesn't, it's not a one and done deal. I think what we would add to that is to say this definition: the transformation happens as you bring all of what you know of yourself to all of what you know of God. When you bring all of what you know of yourself, and we say it that way because, like, even at my age, I still am learning some things about myself. At any given point in time, this is what I can see about myself, and so I bring that to God. And I bring it to all of what I know about God. So in my early development, because of the story that I told you about my dad, God was like my dad. He was this really great guy who could be dangerous. So I was bringing what I knew about myself to that God. Story that emerged for me. I'm 27 years old. I'm on the staff of the Western Hills Baptist Church in Fort Worth. Senior pastor calls a Saturday morning staff meeting. There are 5 pastors plus the senior pastor. I'm really angry that we are meeting on Saturday. And by the way, what I experienced, the unsafety that I experienced in my home of origin had produced a lot of anger in me that I was carrying around inside and hiding and pretending about. And he called a Saturday morning meeting, and somewhere in that meeting, I was angry that we were meeting. My temper boiled over. I shoved a little round table that we were all sitting around. Coffee went flying everywhere. I took my finger and stuck it right in the nose of my senior pastor and said, "You can take this job and stick it where the sun doesn't shine. I'm going home." And then I turned around and walked out. Sometimes I say that and I get applause. It's like, yeah, way to go. And then there are other people who are sitting in the room saying, holy moly, and you're still alive. I walked home, didn't tell Betty what was going on. Saturday night, didn't sleep, went to church Sunday morning. The church was big enough that we couldn't, Preston and I didn't have to interact with each other. Sunday night, didn't sleep. Monday morning, went to church. I'm pretty sure I'm about to be fired. This is in the mid-70s. Pastors who acted the way that I acted then were going to be fired, and they were never going to get a job as a pastor again. Preston met me at the door. He said, we got to talk about what happened on Saturday. I said, I know, let's get it over with. He said, well, let's go into my office. Went into his office and sat down in 2 opposing love seats. And the first thing that he said to me was, Jim, you're one of the finest young pastors that I have ever worked with. Well, I was really disoriented. Like I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. And then he said, and this is what I want you to hear, you have some things going on inside of you that if you don't get them figured out, you're never going to be who God created you to be. That was profoundly true. I couldn't recognize how profoundly true it was then, but that was profoundly true. And then he said, if you're going to keep working here, I heard that really clearly, you're going to go see...
If you're going to keep
working here, you're going to go see Joe. Joe is a pastoral counselor about 2 miles down the road, and you're going to see him every Tuesday afternoon, and you're going to see him until he says you don't have to see him anymore. So I saw Joe for about 2 years. It wasn't a typical counselor's office where, we sat in chairs or, whatever it is you do in a counselor's office. We worked in his woodworking office, his shop. I handed tools to him, poured tea for him. We'd go in his truck. And all the time we're talking, and he's just creating a safe place for me to authentically tell the story of my first formation. And so we're like, I don't know how many months, 6, 8 months into the journey. And one day I go in and I'm kind of frustrated with somebody at work and I'm talking about being frustrated. And he said, I appreciate you telling me that. How do you feel about that? And I told him something else and he said, okay, but how do you feel about that? I told him one more time and he said, so Jim, I'm asking, I hear what you're saying, but the question I'm asking is, how do you feel about that? And with a lot of exasperation in my voice, I said, obviously, I don't know how I feel because I've answered the question 3 times and I've gotten it wrong every time. And he said, no problem. He said, there are 4 kinds of feelings, primary colors: mad, sad, glad, scared. And so all of a sudden I had some language for talking about something that, like one of the pieces of my family of origin was, it was not okay to express feelings. And so he began to help me over a period of time. I began to develop the capacity to think intellectually about my feelings. And then one day I came in and he said, so you've gotten really good at that. He said, now the next step is you've got to, and did you hear this? The next step, it's a process. The next step is you've got to learn how to feel your feelings and take them into the presence of God. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Because I was pretty sure that if I actually felt what I was feeling, I was either going to punch somebody's lights out and end up in jail somewhere, or I was going to fall into a deep pit of depression that I would never come out of. Neither one of those were true. Joe just kept being a safe place who coached me. And what I began to learn to do was take a little piece of what I knew to be true to be authentic with God, and then run hide in the corner and see what happened. And I just grew my capacity one step at a time. I expected God to, one day I was going to show up and be authentic, and God was going to be angry like my dad was. That never happened. I remember the day where I finally shook my fist and just told God how angry I was with all of the veracity that was in me. I sobbed like a little baby. It still moves me to tears when I tell you the story, because it was the first time in my life that I was able to authentically say what was true for me. I had felt so lonely, so alone, so broken, so shamed. And I had the experience of God just wrapping his arms around me. He didn't judge me, he didn't shame me, he didn't criticize me. He just wrapped his arms around, and he didn't coach me or teach me anything. He just sat with me, taking all of what I know about myself to all of what I know of God. And that was a beginning place for me, and it wasn't the end place. There has been this ongoing journey of me taking all of what I know of who I am to what I know about God. And what I know about myself has changed, and what I know about God has changed. I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to take a moment and just reflect for a moment. What would you say to God? Or I want you to say to God what you are pretending he doesn't know. Now, stay with me just a second. I knew that God knew all those things about me. Like, I know all the verses that you can quote that God knows everything. But there's a difference in knowing that God knows everything and knowing that God knows everything. And so I was pretending a lot. What are you pretending that God doesn't know as you live your life? Just be quiet for 60 seconds and see where that takes you. If you were able to name anything in that moment, that's a step forward. Some of you couldn't, like it was so scary that you couldn't even name anything, but the fact that you tried, that's a step forward. And so let me circle back. We believe that authenticity is the key to transformation, and authenticity is a skill that you learn with practice and support over time. And though this is good educational psychological theory, what I love about it is that you find it in the life of Jesus.
Yeah, I love stories about transformation, but I really love stories about authenticity. And this is one of my very favorites. It's in all 3 of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I want you to just stay with me for just a minute and let's see what this looked like in Jesus' life. Here's the story. They went to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, "Sit here while I go and pray." Now, here's what's happening here. I want you to go with me in your imagination. First of all, Jesus is a real person. We've got to remember that when we're reading these stories, that Jesus is a real human. He's not just like performing being human. He is a real human being living a real human life. And I don't know exactly how much he knew about what was happening, but he knows what's coming. And he is having an absolutely normal human response to that. He doesn't want it. And so he's going to the garden to be painfully honest with God. We'll see that in a minute. But notice that he takes his people with him, right? And he says, sit here while I go and pray. And then he takes his closest ones, and he says, you come with me. And I think that says something about how, the process of being authentic, from the crowds to his people to the three. And so it says, he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. And he told them, my soul is crushed to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. I want you to just think about that for a minute. Have you ever said that out loud to a friend? Let them see how troubled and distressed you are, and said to them, my soul is troubled to the point of death. Jesus is opening himself up to his people. And then he keeps going. He goes on a little further and falls to the ground. And he prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour might pass him by. And he cries out. He's not whispering. He cries out, Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. You could do this if you will. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. I love that Jesus doesn't show up in this moment like pretending to be a hero, but instead he is painfully honest with God. God, my Father, I know that this is where we've been going the whole time, but now that we're here, I don't want to do this. Take this away. And I want you to notice that God does not answer that prayer the way Jesus prays it at that moment. And Jesus knows his Father well enough that he says, but I want your will to be done, not mine. But it's both and, right? I don't want this, and I want your will. And so then he goes back and he finds the disciples asleep. And I just bless, right? He says to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you even watch with me for 1 hour? I don't know about you, but I hear the pain, maybe the disappointment in Jesus' voice. Couldn't you watch with me for even 1 hour? But keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation, for the spirit is willing, even though the body is weak. We see Jesus here. He needs his people. And just notice, he lets them all the way in. He leaves them again, and he goes back to God, and he prays the same prayer. And then when he returns to them again, he finds them sleeping again, for they could not keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. And I love his response to them. It's not the same as the first time, is it? He says, go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. But then we know how the story ends, right? The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here. And I want you to notice one more thing with me. Jesus brings his people to the garden to share his moment of painful vulnerability, and they let him down. I want you to notice that he doesn't get from them what he was hoping for. And I want you to know that, because one of the big fears that we bring to this is that fear that if I get real, I'll get hurt. And here's what I want to say to you. If you get real, you will get hurt. And not being real hurts more. Being inauthentic hurts even more. Let's take it one more step. The world does not need any more inauthentic And I want to go so far as to say the world does not need us to be perfect. They do not resent us because we are not perfect. They do not resent us because we are flawed. They resent us because we won't tell the truth about it. And the world, I wonder, what would happen is if as we are out there on mission, making a difference in the world, if we did it with a kind of authenticity and courage that says, I am going to be honest, I'm going to be transparent, I'm going to be vulnerable with you.
We believe that authenticity is the key to living the life that Jesus created us to live. And we believe it's a journey and a process that requires effort and support and encouragement. And you're in a church that's providing that. Pastor Darren and the people on the staff, we've been working and coaching all of them for a number of years. And on the retreat this weekend, there were 150 leaders who were introduced to some of this kind of thing, so some of this kind of language and some of the work to be done. And so we've given you some homework assignments to do, and we want to encourage you to do those. What we want to say to you is this is a journey. Look for the support that is offered by the congregation. Ask your pastors and your leaders how they can support you and work with you, because what will happen over time, and what is happening over time, is that Heartland is becoming a place where transformation is what we do here. It's who we are. It's how we do things. And folks on the outside, where they don't look for perfection, they look for people who are on the journey of doing the work that you're doing. So do the work. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you today.
I didn't know how I was going to end this today, but in the first service I took a risk, and I'm going to just keep doing it with you guys. So to live this out, many of you know who I am because of my public presentation in front of you. You see me every week, and I'm somebody who is confident to stand on a stage and to speak, and I like to feel that I come with my whole heart, and I work hard at it, and I'm good at what I do, and I care deeply, and I'll stay till the last person, and I'll stand out in the lobby, or I'll bring everything that I have to help people. And I'm not quiet or shy, but if you were to know me in my private self, where my family would know me, or the staff that work with me every day, you'd find out that I'm not an extrovert at all, that I actually am I'm an introvert, and I love to read a good book all by myself, and I'm not at a party out in the front. I'm probably leaning up against the wall with one or two people, and I'm letting everybody else sort of do their thing, and I can be pretty critical of myself sometimes, because I work so hard at what I do that sometimes when I'm by myself, I can focus on the things that aren't going right more than the 100 other things that are. But what's also true is a little layer in is a secret self that to set this up, you got to know a little bit of my story. So when I was a kid, I grew up moving all the time. My parents were missionaries, and we went to a lot of places. They were great parents, and we did some great things, but we were always moving. So I was always the new kid. So I learned how to make friends really fast, but they're the kind of friends that, you ever watch that show Survivor, and you have to make some friends really quick because you want to stay alive? And that's kind of the friends that I had. I knew a lot of people, and I knew how to be friendly and how to get along and how to survive. But what I realized in my adult life was I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't have the capacity to have long-term friendships. I just didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't need them. Didn't know that I needed them. In fact, it was only with working with Jim years ago that I began to see that inside of all of this public self is a really lonely person that doesn't know how to have close friends with people in a way that would be transforming and opening up. And when you don't have the love that you need from the relationships that you're supposed to have, you'll look for that love in in places that are damaging to the soul. And so I thank God that years ago, God brought me to a place where I learned something I didn't know that was back here, ended up coming around here. And by the grace of God, I was able to start addressing that and to tell this story in a way that has brought such freedom in my life. It was not easy, and I'm still learning how to do that. But I just want to share that with you to know that all of us struggle with something, and all of us have a way of being that's normal to us. And when I think about all I knew as a pastor, all the Bible verses I knew, and to know that I still had a way of showing up that God had some freedom for, I'm so grateful. Can I just say right now how thankful I am for Pastor Jim and for Tricia, for them being a part of our service today. Thank you so much. I love you. I'm so grateful for you. I want to close today by just leading you in a prayer. I do believe every time we gather, there are two kinds of people in the room. There are people whose hearts are pointing towards Jesus, and there's people whose hearts are just pointing away from Jesus. I mean, you could be a part of a church for a long time. You could actually be close. I mean, you could have been sitting on the front row all your life. So your body is close to Jesus, but your heart is pointing in another direction. Then there are people who are physically, they've never been in church a day in their life. They're physically far from Jesus, but their heart has been turned towards him. And I don't know where you are on your journey, but I know every time we gather, God has people present, and he's brought a person to a place where he's turned their heart towards him. And I want to lead you in that prayer of connection. That'll be the beginning of a real transformation in your life. So if you just bow your heads for a minute, let me lead you in a prayer. The way you access a real relationship with God always starts with a humble admission. And it starts with I can't pray this prayer for you, but I'll give you some words, some language. You pray the prayer that's authentic in your heart. It goes like this. Oh God, I know that I need you. Tell him that you need him, that you know that you can't live without him. Or, God, something's got to change, and that person is me, and I need you. I need you. And then say the next part of the prayer. Oh God, I'm sorry. Forgive me for trying to live without you, for living in a way that's damaging to others or to myself. Forgive me for the mistakes I've made. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Something like that. And then the last part of the prayer is a real open-hearted cry. God, I'm ready to follow you. I'm ready to let you lead me. My heart is open, God. I pray that you would lead me forward. Maybe you pray it this way. God, I give you my whole life. Help me. Lord, I pray for every person praying this prayer as they take a step towards you today, as they open their heart. I know you are the healer. I know you restore. I know you redeem mistakes. And I pray that a year from now, as they follow you, they will not recognize themselves. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. Come on, give God praise for every person praying that kind of prayer today.